Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to start this wonderful event of panel discussion with two sweet little words in English. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining for this session. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this wonderful panel discussion. And thank you so much for being here. And I'm very happy and excited to share some part of what I know about Kathalaya. But one simple introduction is I'm a student of Kathalaya. And that's what I would say. And then Kathalaya is, as you know, it's a true pioneer in the realm of storytelling, has been spent 25 years passionately working towards the vision of aim to revolutionize education through the profound art of storytelling. And their dedication and innovation in this field are truly outstanding. In 2005, Kathalaya achieved a remarkable milestone by entering the Limca Book of Records for hosting the first international festival of storytelling in India. Over this wonderful journey of 25 years, there are fantastic milestones, but one milestone which I say is that 10 lakh children are impacted by Kathalaya so far. And that's the biggest achievement, and through the magic of storytelling there. But their influence does not stop here. Kathalaya trains training arm, the International Academy of Storytelling, which actually does the instrumental in certifying people as storytellers, now have inspired and motivated 98,000 people to take up storytelling as a profession there. That's a wonderful achievement. And moreover, so far they have done 167 batches in their center itself, not just here, and that's a remarkable achievement is what I say. And Kathalaya mission is nothing short of revolutionary in the field of education. Their goals encompass creating an effective teaching and elevating storytelling to the mainstream of education as well. They have got many awards, and with such a visionary vision and the track record of extraordinary achievement, Kathalaya today stands as the beacon of change in the world of education, using the timeless art of storytelling to create a brighter, more enriching future for all of us. This year, Kathalaya is celebrating 25 years, and my wish from my bottom of heart is to see they celebrate the 50th year of Kathalaya in this place itself. That's my wish. I'll not take much time. Let me introduce the panelists first. I'm very delighted and very, very happy to introduce esteemed panelist for today's discussion with a person who has got a remarkable career spanning over 20 years in the field of advertising, theater, mythology, and this individual is truly luminary in the true world of storytelling. Now, as a storyteller, he has captivated the diverse audiences from corporate leadership teams and even the storytellers who share their vision of spreading the magic of stories there. Before coming to storytelling, I think he was also in a very big company, and he studied at many places: Harvard Business Review, BCG, Deloitte, PwC, HDST, anything you name, he was there. But one company he got associated was Ogilvy and McCann, and he specializes in brand storytelling, brand narratives, leadership stories, data storytelling. And all of you, please put your hands to welcome Ameen Haque onto the stage there. And let me also tell you one more thing. He is also a student of Kathalaya. That's what I am. Very good. Now, let me take the pleasure to introduce the next panelist here. It's with great pleasure I introduce the next panelist, who currently holds a very, very esteemed position as the art director, and I'm sure all of you know this one word, Amar Chitra Katha. Okay, and he is the art director in Amar Chitrakatha. One single line when I spoke to him, when I interacted with him, he said one single line that defines himself as one who firmly believes that the comics are a gateway to alternate universes, what he said. That's the art of what he said. And then I would also say his journey has been nothing short of an extraordinary, as he grew up amidst the constellation of the iconic characters from beloved comic publications like Tinkle, Amar Chitrakatha, Target, Children World. From an early age, he found himself drawn into the fictional dreams, and I'm sure all children would have known two characters. One is Supandi and the another one is Shambhu. And he is the creator of those two wonderful characters. Okay. I request all of you to please put one more big hand to Savio Mascrenhas, who is going to be the one more panelist of ours. Okay? And now the third panelist whom I'm going to introduce is, when I spoke to her, I feel it's really a privilege to introduce this panelist to this wonderful audience here, because she is basically an engineer and turned out to be a wonderful story writer. And she has written 30 story books, and she continues to write, and it never stops. That's the best part of it. And if you ask me, her literary prowess has garnered her distinction of becoming the best-selling author of one book which I love the most. In fact, the moment I saw the cover, I bought it. That's about Bhagavad Gita for children, and it's not only for children. Everybody should go through this book, is what I say. And let's put a warm welcome to Namma Bangalore girl. That's Roopa Pai there for you. Okay, now I'm sure all of you will be wondering who is the fourth panelist. Obviously, your guess is right. Let me have the pleasure in introducing a luminary in the world of storytelling who effortlessly wears numerous hats as an internationally renowned storyteller, master trainer, educator, author, academician. And her illustrator career has her the grace of not once, but the 3-time TEDx speaker, and she is the global voice of storytelling community. And she is not just a speaker, she is an Ashoka Fellow and true pioneer of storytelling movement in India. For 25 years, what is that she has done is only to tell stories, and stories. And she has inspired so many people through her storytelling. As we gather here to celebrate 25 years of legacy in storytelling, her acknowledgement, let's acknowledge her incredible journey. She traveled 48 countries, right, and 27 states in India. If one state is missed, I only say they were not lucky or something. But that lucky moment will also come for her. And her contribution is not just on storytelling, but it's on education, inspiring and building careers for them. There are 27 franchises which I established as a Kathalaya itself in this. Such a wonderful character. And I met, and first time when I heard her story, that was the day I got impressed. And today also, when I tell story, I say one salute to Geeta ji. That's what I say. Let's welcome, a warm welcome to Geeta ma'am, affectionately called as Geeta ji. And I must also not forget that it's this wonderful audience. Without you, what is the role of us? We give a big hand to all this wonderful audience who have come here. Okay? Let's get into the panel discussion, and let's start how we go ahead on this. Okay, I will also sit along with them. Let's see how I can do this. And it's going to be a very, very tough and challenging task for me, because everybody is good communicators, and how they explain is going to be there. But let me give you, since Geeta ji, you started, yeah, hello. Geeta ji, you started, this is the 25 years that you are celebrating, so we would like to go first with you. I want to know, Kathalaya completes 25 years, and could you tell us what's the role of storytelling was when you began and its evolution over a period of last 25 years? You can pick up the mic, man. It's on. Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
Thank you, Krishna, for being the moderator, and you didn't speak about yourself. I think he's a great communicator, corporate trainer, so I'm glad that he agreed to moderate this panel, so I think we have to give him a big hand. Thank you all for being here, because it matters a lot. Most of the energy that a storyteller receives all the time, I would say, is from the audience. So when we look at the audience, we derive a very special kind of energy to be able to communicate and transmit what is deep inside our hearts. And I'm a very emotional person, and I think that was one of the reasons that I took storytelling. I didn't take storytelling, it happened to me. I'm not a storyteller by choice, but a storyteller by chance. Things happen to you, isn't it? And that's what happened to me. It was about 25 years ago, and I would say a little earlier than that, in 1996, having been a teacher for about 20 years before that, blah, 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 went on with my subjects, and then I was in the library, because I thought, everywhere there is always competition. People are not very happy when you bring something new. Even in a very different kind of school, it was an alternative school, but yet people said, that's not the way to teach history. Children are sitting on trees and listening to her stories. So they wanted a classroom. They wanted everything to be within the four walls. So that's what happened. And I was a rebel from my childhood, in a sense. I never thought I could say more than 3 periods in a class. So, 40 minutes after 40 minutes after 40 minutes for 8 periods, oh my God. Nothing, everything went above my head. And you know how teachers were in those days, right? So, this was always troubling me as to how, when I became a teacher, I could ask children to sit straight, keep quiet, and listen to me. So I also noticed that they would jump out of the windows and go, and I never said anything to them. And that's when I chose spaces to tell them stories from history. And but I didn't know that I was actually telling stories. I thought it came naturally to me to be able to relate a lesson through a story which I knew. I used to read a lot, and I grew up on stories, listening to them from my parents, because now when I look back at storytelling, it was a time when there was migration happening from small towns. And if you know that storytelling in all cultures around the world, everyone was doing oral tradition, telling stories, and it was all around the hearth, the open fire, or in their houses, or in spaces, and there was no printed word then. So I'm talking before Gutenberg, one night when he was drunk on wine, discovered the printing press. All right, so this was before 1444. Now before that it was only oral tradition. And after he found the printed word, slowly people started putting the stories into words and documenting them. And so the printed word became a larger picture than the oral tradition around the world. But still, I would say in civilizations like ours, we were almost one civilization behind. So we were still telling stories in the houses, outside as theater, as spaces, but these were mostly folk tales, folk people, theater, villages, everywhere. So here, people started feeling that once it was getting less and there was migration and cities were developing, that it was important to document these tellers. So I'm talking about as late as 1900s when A.K. Ramanujam, Kira Narayan Swami from the south, Komal Kothari ji in Rajasthan, they all started collecting tales from carpenters, from tailors, from people, because they thought they were all going as workers and they were not telling stories anymore. So they started becoming museum pieces. These stories and storytellers were no longer existing, but I'm glad that they did it. But they did it more as documenting and collecting tales and writing them down rather than telling it out, because the tellers were already there in the villages. So we didn't have a storyteller or a telling tradition so much in the urban places. We had the British telling stories, the US people telling stories, but not so much in India telling stories in English as much as we had in the regional languages. Okay, to cut the long story short, I was part of this migration that my parents came from the south into Bombay, and this was early 1960s, and that's where they thought that the best way to revive or to keep the storytelling tradition alive was to take us to films, to discourses, to street theaters, to dramas, because in those days there was still not technology. So I grew up on that, and they told me stories. I told my mother in Tamil and my father in English, because I went to an English medium school. Well, I still was not aware of the word called storytelling. This was already there, it was on. And then one fine day when they put me in the library in a school, I just thought children were not reading, and I said, let me tell them a story from the book, because I was brought up on a diet of books. There was nothing else except a Murphy radio in our house, not even a tape recorder. So we all only listened to the radio, and we had a lot of books to read. So that's when I thought, let me tell them a story. And I still remember the first story I told them was from the Hitopadesha, the fish, frog, and turtle. And as I was telling the story, the bell rang, and they said, what happened next? Because I said the frog went, and I said, so there came the fish, and I did some, and they said, then what happened? And then I said, we'll continue next class. So they wanted to know from which book I was telling the story, and there were tales from the Hitopadesha and the library, and I said, if you read from page 24, you'll get the rest of the story. Now, I saw that children were frantically going to grab a book when I told them a story and instill that kind of wonder in them as to what happened next. I still hadn't realized that I was a storyteller. And there was one person with Girish Karnad who had come, and she said, why don't you have a workshop in the city, and we'll call it a creative writing workshop. And I said, but I'm not a good writer. You see, there is a lot of difference between a writer. Roopa is a great writer, and I can see the stories as I read them. You read the story, and the storyteller creates imagination in the head. But what the storyteller does is first creates pictures, and then she has to put it in the words. It's very difficult. So it's very difficult for me to put my pictures into, because I think here, I don't document. I'm not a good documentation. Okay, so that is a big difference between a story writer and I think a storyteller. So here I was conjuring images and trying to see what I can do, and she said, let's have a workshop in the city. Things come together, and that's why I said storyteller by chance, because there should be the stars. Maybe the Arundhati star was right above, and there was this person who wrote a little column in the newspaper saying sounds coming from a room. If you want to know who this is, it's a storyteller in action. If you want to contact her, this is 66. In those days, there was only the landline. Okay, so 26689856 was the number given. We had the first telephone in our house, and my telephone began to ring, and it never ceased to ring from that day, because I was called a storyteller. So that was my journey of becoming a storyteller. I'll just take one more minute. it was a long journey. It was 25 years. A lot of things happened. But when I saw what is a state of storytelling, because I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have a guru, I didn't know whom to look at. I was shy to even tell in a meeting anywhere. So I said, I'm just a storyteller. That's what I used to introduce myself as. Because people would ask the first question, what's a storyteller? What do you do? That was the question that was raised 25 years ago. So I had to explain myself. But again, I was wondering where to start, how to begin. And then I saw one day as I was sitting near the river was going here and there. It was going towards the fields, towards the dam. It was jumping over the pebbles. And I said, okay, the river is going in all directions. But one thing that the river does is it flows. Okay, so that's the nature of river. So I got the nature of storytelling is to tell stories. Now where? Do I tell folk tales? Do I tell performances? Do I revive the storytelling tradition? Or do I start a training academy? Or do I tell stories to children? Where do I begin? But I knew I wanted to start with schools, but then how? And so that's when I decided maybe I would be the first person to first build a dam over this river so that I can collect these waters in one place before I think of where to let them to. So that's what I did. I just built a dam and I sat there. I collected the waters and slowly began to put the tributaries. I said, first, I will do it for education and learning. Next, I will start an academy for storytelling. I will do stories on wheels, where I'll take children out on trips. I'd probably do something for a corporate audience. I might do something for a journalist, but it all came step by step, only through experience, and all because of people's support. I should thank all the people who came to me and said, why don't you do a workshop for us? And the second person I definitely like to thank, because in those days we were new, it was creative, is the funding agencies that came forward. And one rule that they have, the Ford Foundation and the Tata Trust, who came forward to help me with their funds, is you can do storytelling for children, for adults, but you're not bringing any religious flavor into that. It has to be neutral stories, and it has to reach everyone beyond caste, creed, religion. And I loved it because I had to then concentrate on mainly the best stories are stories of animals and birds, isn't it? So I chose animal characters, animal stories, and that's when my research began on how I don't have to color my stories with any religion, but cut across and do something which will go as a whole to the human beings and to children, whether it's rural or urban. Sorry, I took some time, but I had to say this. This was why I kind of started loving this field. And thank you so much again for listening, because that's my 25 years journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's wonderful to listen to your story as well. Roopaji, I know that you are an author. How have you seen the role of storytelling since you began your stint as an author and from your childhood that you recall?
Thank you, Krishna, for a lovely introduction, and congratulations to Geeta and Kathalaya for completing a wonderful 25 years in storytelling. I'm not sure. I think the mediums have changed of how stories are told, but the stories never change. And the best stories are those that appeal to both children and adults, because adults were children once. So, so anything that appeals to a child will also appeal to an adult. And I've been telling stories in many different ways. In my books, I tell stories through writing. I'm also part of a company that I co-founded called Bangalore Walks with my husband, and we have been telling the stories of Bangalore for over 15 years now. So that's a different kind of storytelling. And then I talk to kids a lot about the stories we tell ourselves. in our heads. And those are the most powerful stories of all, the most influential stories, because if we tell ourselves negative stories about ourselves, that's what we're putting out in the universe, and that's what we attract. So my whole my whole mission, without actually stating it as a stated mission, but my whole effort has always been, the thing is, I have always dealt with children. So I get them at their most impressionable. There's a huge opportunity to make a difference to how they live their lives. We all know in school, the subjects we loved the best were the subjects that had teachers that made that subject interesting. It was never about the subject at all. Any subject can be brilliantly accessible and interesting if the teacher makes it so. And so when I talk to kids, I realize what a tremendous responsibility I hold in my hands. These are impressionable young minds. Anything I tell them can hurt or help them. So I have to be very, very careful. And for this, I think one of my biggest mentors was my very first editor in a magazine called Target. I don't know how many of you know of Target or have read Target. It was my absolute favorite magazine growing up. I came upon it too late in my life, only at the age of 13. It had been around since I was 9, so now you can all quickly calculate my age. But it had been around since I was 9. I missed 4 years of reading Target. I came upon it when I was 13. I was blown away by the stories, only because, guess why? The stories were uniformly brilliant because there was a very wonderful editor at its helm, an English woman called Rosalind Wilson. She started the magazine, she helped it. But what really made it special was not the beauty of the stories themselves, but the fact that the stories were about Indian children like me. I had never read stories about Indian children like me living my kind of life in English, in the English language. My favorite books at that time were Amachitra Katha, which told me wonderful stories about India and its mythology, but there never were any child protagonists in them. Okay, there was Dhruva, there was Prahlada, there was Nachiketa. All of them had horrible lives. Dhruva's dad rejected him. Prahlada's dad was constantly trying to kill him. And Nachiketa's dad gave him away to death. Like, go to Yama. So, and then the other ones we read were Ganesha, who was created, Hanuman, Krishna. Ganesha's dad Ganesha's dad sent hordes after his son to destroy his son, and then finally took his head off himself. Let dad get the job done, And then there was Krishna, who, when I only realized the brutality or the scariness of these stories when I started reading them to my children. Somehow, children of my generation absorbed all this very, with much equanimity. We never questioned it. Okay, this is what happens. But when I was reading to my children, and when my child was old enough to understand, the first books I got were Ganesha, Krishna, Hanuman. These three have to be read, etc. Ganesha, she was horrified. She said, this is worse than Hansel and Gretel's dad. Okay, so and then Krishna was just children, babies being smashed to the ground. Okay, and there's just violence after violence, and I'm like, okay, maybe we need to step back a little and maybe tell it in some other way, because clearly a new generation of children who question everything. We didn't question it. So like I was saying though, there were no books or stories about children like me. So the other author I read extensively was Enid Blyton, who wrote the most marvelous stories, except she wrote only about British children. So I grew up thinking, British children had a great life, my life sucks. Indian childhood is terrible because the British children were always roaming around with no adult supervision. Here there were 25 adults always asking me, where are you going? And adults I couldn't even identify sometimes. Faraway relations and all would have a say in what I should be wearing and doing and going. So it was, and then at the age of 13, I came upon Target magazine and I said, wow, for once they were writing about children exactly like me, living my kinds of life, going for picnics where they ate chitrana, mosrana and were happy with it. And they were not eating scones and clotted cream and jam, and I was like, oh, this is also possible that it can be fun. So a mirror was shown up to me about my own child and what a privileged life I was leading, just being in India, a place where the sun always shines, where the land is so fertile that you throw things and grow, a land so rich that the whole world came to its shores that it never needed to go out. We never needed to go out. The British needed to go out because they live in a cold, wet island. What do you do there? Anywhere you turn, like, you walk, you go some 100 kilometers, the sea is there. So the story there, like, these are stories, right? The stories that make up culture, the stories that fashion people, civilizations. So the English story is always go to sea, be a man. Go to sea is, if you get away from your country, then you're a man, you're exploring new lands. But we never needed to explore new lands because wherever we went, India never finished. And anyway, why should we go out when the whole world is coming here? So these things came to me only when I started reading Target. And as I grew up and read more history, I realized why there were no adults in Enid Blyton's stories. She was writing in the aftermath of the Second World War, when children were sent away to the country to be safe because London was in danger of being bombed. And it must have been a very traumatic experience for those children to not know when they came back whether their houses would be standing, whether their parents would be alive. And this is also the reason why boarding school stories are such a big part of English literature. I mean, even Harry Potter at its heart is a boarding school story. All the rest is trimmings, but it's actually because their parents were colonizing places and living somewhere else and sending their kids off to boarding school. Again, traumatic experience. And here I was sitting in South India, which is certainly the best part of India. I'm sorry, I'm biased, but it's certainly the most lovely part. And I'm sitting here and being nurtured and nourished by a variety of adults who care for me, who don't mind waking up early in the morning to make chitrana, fresh food, so that I don't have to eat out of cans. And I'm thinking, but I want to be in boarding school because they have midnight feasts. And, so that is the power of storytelling. That is the power of storytelling. You can tell stories and transform a child and make them think that what they have is not good enough. And that's when I decided, as a young person, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I was one of the lucky ones who knew what I wanted to do in life. But when I started reading Target was when I decided that I would grow up and write Indian stories for Indian children so that there would never again be a generation that felt life was elsewhere. Wow. That is always here.
That's fantastic. That's a lovely journey. She's the one, she decided to write for a Target and she wrote for a Target. That's the best thing to happen. Lovely man. Yeah.
When I read Target, that I wanted to work for Target. That became my dream job. In the middle, I got detoured into getting an engineering degree because middle-class South Indian parents. So did that, then handed degree to mom and said, okay, I'm moving cities, 2,000 kilometers to Delhi because one magazine called Target comes out of there and I want a job there. Yeah. So I moved and as it so happens, then there were only 3 people in Target. 3, even Savio illustrated for Target, right? No? Okay. So there were only 3 writers in Target, means the editor, from the top editor to the junior most, there were 3 people. Okay, and they never left. People never left their jobs in Target. But 1 week before I walked in, completely cold calling out of the blue, this newbie from Bangalore asking, I want a job. Somebody from editorial had quit 1 week before. And I got the job. And that showed me forever and ever that if you truly want something, and if you're willing to make the sacrifices that it requires and the hard work, the universe will conspire to make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, one of the best things is that you were a student of Kathalaya, but the best part is that you took the stories to corporate world. That's the best part, what I liked. And what's your view on this evolution of your role?
I never said that.
I remember asking Geeta when I first met her, and it's a privilege to be sharing stage with a teacher who's taught you earlier. So truly honored to be here. Congratulations, Geeta. I remember asking her when I saw her at a storytelling performance, all this is fine, but what do you do? And I remember she said, no, this is what I do. So I thought maybe she didn't understand my question, so I explained. I said, what do you do for this? Because storytelling is fine, but one has to sustain oneself. So how do you sustain yourself? She said, this is what I do. I still think that she didn't understand, I thought she didn't understand my question. I said, no, what do you do Monday to Friday, morning to evening? She said, this is what I do. And I said, well, then if Geeta can do it, I can also do it. So, in some ways, you need somebody to show you the way. At least for me, I was lucky that, she had no one to show her the way, but I was lucky that, somebody was doing it. And somebody's walked the path before you, and that makes it easier for you. Having said that, I came from the corporate world. I'd worked in advertising a long stint, so I'd worked in Ogilvy and Mehta, the ads that you see on television, where we interrupt your TV viewing. So I was working in that industry, selling you all kinds of things, but I did realize that, for example, I was working for one of our clients was a bank. In the North Korea, when you have to persuade people, you use other forms of persuasion. You don't need storytelling there. When a restaurant opens in your neighborhood, you want to go and try out the food. You want to check it out. But when a bank opens in your neighborhood, you don't say, let me go and open an account there. And my job in advertising was to persuade people for the client's business. And that got me thinking, what persuades people? What kind of communication persuades people? And then I realized it's stories. And evenings I was doing theater, and both were forms of storytelling. But then when I saw her tell stories, I thought, hey, one could do this. And on a whim and a fancy, me and two other students of Kathalaya, Shreya and Sariga Menon, we brainstormed a bit at a barista. We came up with the name Storywalas. We set up a website and we sat twiddling our thumbs waiting for work to come in, but no work came in initially. So I started telling stories, and once I started telling stories, people saw that, okay, people would stay back. Parents, and when you tell stories in Bangalore, largely people from IT, nuclear families, no grandmothers at home, parents at home, they come in, they bring in their children, and after the performances they would ask, hey, what's your story, what do you do? And I said, I worked earlier, this, that, and then a gig followed. Somebody said, come and teach at our MBA institute. Then somebody said, I am from this company, will you come and run a workshop there? And I realized, no matter which business you are in, once you are in business, you are also in the storytelling business. If you're in the dating business, you're telling a story. If you're interviewing, you're telling a story. If you are in the fundraising business, if you're a startup founder, you're telling a story. And a lot of people do good work, but they need help with their stories. And that's where we came in, and it's been a great journey. We just finished 10 years ourselves. It's been 11 years. Was it 11 years ago when I attended the course? And then we set up Storywalas, yeah. So it's been 10 years, and then, whether it's Boston Consulting Group or Deloitte or Google or Nike or Puma or Harvard Business Review or, teaching at IIM Bangalore or ISB, all of these places we've had the pleasure of, and the honor and the privilege and the responsibility of taking stories to these places, and it's been a great ride. So thank you.
I must tell, one is the persuasion, but what he is doing is to ethically persuade. That means that no push, no pressure, no force to them. And that's done only through the pure communication. I'm sure if you look at the advertisement from the field he is coming, all of you must be using a L'Oreal for a long time. It's a most expensive brand. And they came up with an iconic statement just to persuade people. They put the negative front and then put the positive. They said, we are expensive, but you're worth it. And that's the statement they made it. And that's what I like that, yeah. And the Savio, yeah, I know that you created wonderful characters and all that, but the best part of you is that how illustratively you do this. But we all have read comics and many things. But what is my question to you is that how these illustrations have changed over a period of last 20 years or so. That's we want to hear from you. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Geeta, for... Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure and a delight to be here today. And thank you, Geeta ma'am, for inviting me over. I've known Geeta a few years now, and we occasionally bump into each other at every Lit Fest. But I had a pleasure of traveling with her from Madurai to, or it was from E-Road to Madurai. This was a 3-hour-long journey, and when you're traveling with a storyteller, it's a fantastic journey. And that was something when she told me that, we are celebrating 25 years and you have to be there. And I said, yes, definitely. So here I am today to share what I have been doing for so many years, telling stories visually. So that has not changed since my childhood. I grew up reading Target. I was a huge fan of Ajit Nayanan's Moochwala and Garab Das. So I guess this was something which appealed to us a lot. The visuals, Amar Chitrakatha, of course, Tinkle, everything was a part of our childhood. When I look at these stories and these visuals which have stayed forever in my mind, I don't know how they have inspired me, but they were through with me through my childhood growing up. And today when I look at them, I would still say okay, the visuals are the same. When we draw for comics, the mediums have changed. Of course, we used to draw on paper at one point. It was quite a tedious thing to do, drawing comics. And even if I explain today how we did that on paper, it's going to be something which I don't know how many of you would really understand, because it was a very tough way of putting out your art on paper. It was a very challenging thing to do then. Of course, now we have the pen tablets that we work on, and it's all digital. Today there is no paper to begin with. So everything is now digitally done. The art, the colors, everything, the making of the comic has changed. But comics have stayed the same. When you tell a story, it is still the same way of telling the story. The characters have to be interesting enough and all of that. Of course, the way you tell a story has also changed over the years. It was very straightforward, linear storytelling at the point when even Amar Chitrakatha was telling a 32-page story. It was very straightforward storytelling. But today, when you look at that same Amar Chitrakatha, you will know that, this story could have been told better, even in visuals. So I wouldn't say that, whatever Amar Chitrakatha has been telling all these years is the ultimate story. There are a lot of layers to each of those characters. For example, if I look at Karna today, I don't think we can tell the story of Karna in 32 pages, right? So there's so much that we could have done, or rather we would still want to do. Today, Amar Chitrakatha tells a lot of stories which get into details of each of these characters. So visual storytelling is something which I feel has been the best part of my life. For me, education has been through visuals. I grew up, I went to college, and all of that happened. I worked as a copywriter to begin with. I did my advertising and public relations. I started working as a copywriter. And I used to write for ads, and one of the ads I remember was for an exercise machine. So this was an exercise machine which had come in from the US. And it was one of those very first rowing machine thing. And I had to write the copy for this. So I went doing the research and I was studying about this. What should I put into the ad? It was a machine which was very fixed in its, very limited in its, you couldn't adjust it as such. So this machine, since it was from the US and anyone who could sit in it had to be as tall as 5'7". That's the average American women height. So then I told this to my boss. I said, we cannot sell this in India. It's not adjustable in the first place. And I don't think an average Indian girl would be able to fit into it. And then he said, let's not focus on those things. We just need to sell this machine in India. I was shocked at that time, and I was also not very sure about what am I doing in advertising. I was telling a lot of lies at that point. So, but I somewhere along the line, I was sketching. I was also doing all my drawings on the side. I used to scribble a lot here and there on my books, and wherever I found space, I used to do that. So then I saw an ad in the newspaper at that point which said that, Tinkle needed an comic book artist. And I said, okay, let me just try. So I walked into their office and showed them my drawings, which I had done. I had entered one of Shankar's drawing competition, and I had done some caricatures. So I showed all of them to Uncle Pai. Of course, he didn't see me at that time. He just saw my work, and he said, okay, these cartoons are good. There's a section in Tinkle which is called See and Smiles. So I had these little gags, and he said, oh, these gags are good, and let's pay this guy 50 rupees per gag. And I sold my first batch of 10 gags and got 500 rupees, and I was like very happy that I was drawing something and that was giving me money. I still didn't realize that that was going to be like a career thing for me. So I did that for a span, I was freelancing as a comic book artist and working full-time as a copywriter. So one fine day, and somewhere around, it was the 31st of December, and by then I was pretty friendly with Uncle Pai and the whole editorial team of Tinkle. And I'd gone, it was the 31st of December, so I'd taken a cake, wished Uncle Pai a Happy New Year, and then he asked me, what are you doing these days? I said, I'm working full-time as a copywriter and part-time as a comic book artist. So he said, what do you like most? And I said, I think I like to draw. Then he said, I'll give you a New Year's gift. So you join as a comic book artist. And I think that was the day I actually stopped working. So, I then realized that visuals, the way I was growing up, today even when I remember, the very first visuals which come to my mind were the Hanuman visuals from Amar Chitra Katha. This has been my learning throughout, growing up. So I think this is something which has always stayed. And today, even when I visit schools and I speak to teachers and I speak to children, I tell them, this is the best medium to teach your child about anything. Be it your stories, be it anything. In fact, we have also spoken to corporates, banks, how do you tell a story? And use visuals as much as you can in your storytelling. So, coming to this point about visuals and how do you tell that has never changed. It's just the way you tell that story. That is something which has changed over the years. But I don't think visuals are going to go anywhere. It's going to be a part and parcel of our lives. Be it a storyteller who tells you words, who tells you a story so well that you sit in an audience and you visualize the whole thing. I remember listening to Geeta ma'am once. She was telling the story of an eagle. And the way she described that eagle and the sounds that she was making, everyone in the audience, right down to the last kid, I think there were more than 300 children, they could all visualize the entire thing because the description that a storyteller does is fantastic, and that just forms these visuals in your mind. So yes, that's what I have been grown up with, visuals, and that is what I'm going to do, tell stories visually.
Yeah, that's a lovely one. In fact, I told my daughter I'm going to meet Amar Chitra Katha art directly. She said, wow, can I also come? Why don't you come? No, I have some other work. This is what they do. That's all. Very good, Savio. Let me cut short the question, but the essence remains, these questions are there. What is one of the biggest challenges that you had, whether it could be technology or anything in your journey, and how did you overcome? We can start with you.
I think get lost is one thing that people tell when you go to somebody's door, no? They say, yeah, no, we don't need storytellers. You can get lost. So I got lost many times like that, and and then I was thinking, because one needs to auto-suggest a lot when you're new in this field, which direction to go, how to go, and things like that. And then you spend most of the initial years in building up the organization, because I also started it as a trust. Thanks to Anmol Velani from IFA. When I went to him, he was the first grantee, and he said, you can experiment storytelling with 5 schools, and you can introduce it as a weekly storytelling period. You can get very carried away by stories, and introducing something new, I was like a kid, and I completely forgot that the grant was only for 1 year. So here I was at the end saying, oh my God, where do I go next? What do I do? So every time, a grantee came forward, we had to only do what they wanted. For instance, if it was doing training, which is what the Tata Trust gave me a grant for, 27 training centers in Chhattisgarh and in Kodaikanal with the tribals. So, you only have to complete what they are asking you to do. It is fun. It is good because I needed the money too. But then, how do you, the next question they ask you is, okay, we'll give you a grant for about 2 years. What will you do after that? How will you sustain yourself? So this is very tricky. So you have to also think of how you have to take care of what you will do after the grant is over. And you can't cheat also because they ask you accountability for every money. So I can't stack away the money also and say I'll use this later. So that also became a problem. And then people whom I could employ, they were all paid. So there comes the first Infosys office on Bannerghatta Road, right opposite to our office. And there, of course, the great Narayan Murthy and his wife is sitting there in the philanthropy session. And so I said, good, technology and wonderful. So after the 2 years grant is over, I'm going to ask them because they are growing, they are a big company. But I know it's not fair because when I went to them, they said, we only help the poorest of the poor. So I was wondering whom you define as poorest of the poor. Okay, so I said, okay, so the door is shut here and what do I do next? So every time what I wanted to tell is the obstacles were there. So I always used to get the first prize for hurdle race in my school and colleges. So hurdles, there were 12 hurdles and I had to jump. So every time I got the first prize, and I knew now why I got the first prize. So there were these hurdles and I had to jump every time. So there are innumerable hurdles that I had to cross through. And then after you build the whole thing, and after you say that you are going to sustain yourself, and you begin, then you don't have money to pay because now there's the Infosys office and software and everywhere. They're paying 20,000, 25,000, and I'm saying I'll pay you 5,000. And said, no way, we don't want a job. So just as Ameen was mentioning a little earlier, sustaining money, this is not a business. It was more of a giving and sharing and more close to the heart like a passion. So these were the challenges that I mainly faced while building up. So every time I wanted to shut shop, something would come. This was also something beautiful because suddenly one Plan India would call me and say, we want you to do something with the Santali tribals. Come on, we'll give you a grant. So this kept happening and that's how we sustained ourselves. And then there is a very small story of Kira, is a Tamil storyteller. He says he used to collect stories from the British times. So there is this viceroy in UK, in Britain. He wakes up and he says, tell me in India, do rice grow on trees? Find out. I think rice grows on trees. So he asked the Indian viceroy. And the Indian viceroy, who is also a British, doesn't know the answer. And he passes it on to the representative, which is a collector in India, who is also a white man. And the collector doesn't know. And he says, this has come from high order, so let me pass it on to the revenue official. The revenue official doesn't know, he goes to the judge. The judge doesn't know, so he goes to the panchayat head, the first Indian. Because all these line of people were all British. So now he comes to the panchayat head and asks him, do rice grow on trees? And the panchayat head says, I will ask my village headman. So the village headman says, I'll ask the villager who grows actually rice. So then he goes and there's rice grown everywhere. And he calls the person and he says, so he calls a person and he says that, rice is grown, I know that rice is grown in the fields, but if a British man, if an English man has said that find out if rice is grown on trees, he it must be very authentic. Vellakaran da. He is like research oriented, he is pakka. So let me find out. So what he does is, he gets drunk that night, and then he goes and knocks against a palm tree. And you know the palms have those little things, frills, like rice. So all that rice falls down, and he says, Marietta, I'm so happy because now I got the answer. Rice is grown on palm trees. So he goes back and he tells it to the judge tells it to the collector, and before long, the viceroy in England says, I want it authenticated. So the judge in India, he pulls out a paper, he writes the statement that the story goes that rice is grown on palm trees, and he asks his village man to put his thumbprint, and it is authenticated now. So what I was trying to say is, it had an advantage for me to be on Crossroads, because that's when I said, let me start an academy for storytelling, because there's no academy for storytelling to train courses. Now, how do I design this course? Well, if I say that rice is grown on palm trees, then it shall be, and that's what I did. So whatever I said, this is the course, this is what the international story. So to authenticate, I got an affiliation from abroad, of course, from US and Sweden. I told them I'm starting an international academy. So one of the advantages of having so many obstacles and facing economical and financial and psychological and social problems was, how do I sustain myself? And that created the Academy of Storytelling, which finally sustained me till today. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead. Only thing is they want us to close by 7 o'clock. That's a strict instruction. And I thought I'd take all that little bit here and there, but they don't allow. So we'll request.
Okay, we'll just keep it very short. Yeah. Challenges, I think, as a children's writer, I had no training to be a children's writer. It's just whatever, I just felt like writing. I had honed the craft by writing a lot from when I was young, and then it had got published here and there, so I assumed that it was decent level of writing. But when I went to write for Target, my first editor there, who is still my editor right now, she would tell me, she would catch stuff in my writing that she would say, but I would have written something, and she says, but why are you telling them this is a good thing? Why are you telling the kids that it's a good thing? And I said, because it is a good thing. He said, according to you. So that was a very big lesson, that don't put your biases into a book for children. A children's writer tells a story and lets the children, the reader, decide what is the right thing. So that was one of the challenges. So most of my challenges have been correcting my writing has been the challenge. Not to talk to children has not been the challenge.
Wonderful.
No challenges, actually. Meaning it's not an honest answer if I say there are no challenges. Of course, there have been challenges, but in the spirit of what the two speakers have said, I believe the obstacle is the path.
Yeah.
And the obstacle is the journey. And if you can embrace that, it opens up new doorways for you. And I'm sure everybody who's done anything slightly hatke has embraced the obstacles, and that has opened up new doorways. You spoke about technology, for example. Well, technology actually is a blessing in disguise, because, the more the data explodes, as a result, people have lower attention spans. As a result, what is the best form to communicate? Stories. So if you think about it, every obstacle actually opens up pathways.
Right. Savio, would you like to share?
So the challenges for me as a comic book artist was, when I just started off, like I said, I had never been to an art school, so I didn't know much about, how do you go about drawing comics. Even today, you don't really have a school which teaches you about comics. Now, of course, there are a lot of courses that you would find online, but the times when I joined the industry, everything was learning for me. I was always looked down upon, this guy doesn't even have a degree. And there were others who were from JJ and all the other big institutes. So that was a big fight for me to, but then you know that you have to prove yourself because you don't have anything else to do, right? I also remember that, when I just joined, and we had our office in DN Road, which is in Bombay, Fort area, and it was just within months of I had joined Tinkle as a comic book artist. The building burnt down on one fine morning, and when I stood there, and it was like 6 months of leaving everything and becoming a comic book artist, and I saw the building burning down, and I said, this is it, the end of what I wanted to do. And Uncle Pai was right there. He was completely shattered. We lost a library which had priceless books. And that was, again, for me, a turning point when Uncle Pai and the whole team, Reena was the assistant editor at that time. Today, she's the editor for Tinkle. The whole team galvanized and brought out the next issue of Tinkle on time. So for me, it was, okay, so I just need to fight back. So there were challenges for me to prove myself as a comic book artist. It's tough to get into that industry because there were greats before me. They were the best of the artists in the industry. But, I was always helped by most of them, like Mr. Ram Vairkar or Mr. Halbe. Vairkar was the one who created Supandi, and Halbe was the one who designed Shikari Shambhu. And these were the guys who were always there to help you. And that is what the industry is about. You look on to these greats for all sort of inspiration. I also remember that, when Halbe retired and he said, you need to take on this character. When Uncle Pai called me to his cabin and he said, Halbe is retiring, so you have to draw Shikari Shambhu. And I couldn't believe myself because this was something which I was never even dreaming of. But Halbe then spoke to me and he said, with every artist, you will grow into this character, you will get the hang of it. People may not like you initially. And I did get a hate mail from a kid who said, who is this guy drawing? It is Mr. Halbe who should be drawing Shikari Shambhu. But you grow into your the characters that you do, and the characters become you, or you become the character. A lot of my friends call me Shambhu at times, just because I've been drawing Shambhu for such a long time. And also what happens is, as you grow and as you learn, I think everything that you do, it just adds to your skills as a comic book artist. So that is what has happened. Technology came in, and that was the best thing which actually opened the doors for us, where we could collaborate with artists across the world. So today we have artists from South America, from Sri Lanka. Earlier it was not possible. You would have only artists from India who would draw their artworks on paper and courier it to you, or not even courier at that time. It was email. So it was it just come in the packets, all of that. But today it's much easier. So definitely that has helped a lot for me as a comic book artist.
That's wonderful to listen. Somebody says, accept rejection and move on. Somebody says, apna uddhar karo, baad mein sab uddhar hoga. That's how she says. And Ameen says that the obstacles will be there. Keep on moving. That's the essence of it. And what you say is adapt to changes, what's happening there. Before I move on to the next, because I want all of you to listen to the stories, so I will stop this for the moment. Let's listen to stories. If there is a time, I'll come back to these questions. Would that be fine with all of you?
I think that's
Okay, wonderful. And if you have questions and answers, we'll come back on this. Let's listen to our story. And I got impressed when I listened to Geeta's one story of bird, and I request let her add some flavor of that bird story also here. That's what I would say. Yes, let's come on to this. Yeah, we can go down and then fix up a mic, and all of you are ready. Yes.
I'm not a storyteller, so I shall warn you. I'm going to read out my story. This is from one of the characters that I had created way back in 1996, 97, I think so. And this is, of course, the childhood adventures of Shikari Shambhu. So this character is called Little Shambhu, and we recently came out with the stories in a prose format. But when this character was created, of course, in the comic book format, one of the stories which I'm going to read out today is how Little Shambhu met his dog Dum Dum. It was a peaceful morning. A peaceful morning it was. There were 5 butterflies flirting with the flower roses. There were 4 frogs who were croaking for breakfast at the pond. 3 bees were busily buzzing around in the garden. 2 squirrels were scampering up and down the mango tree. I don't know for what reason. And 1 little Shambhu snuggled deep into his bed, snoring peacefully on this fine Saturday morning. Suddenly, there was a cacophony of sounds, both human and metallic, that shattered this silence. It was dum da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum 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 da dum da dum da dum. That's all the sound of the metallic thing. Oh no, groaned little Shambhu. Dad is doing the cooking today. Yes, that was Papa Shambhu, getting breakfast ready. He took great pride in his cooking skills. Well, that's what he did every weekend. And Mama Shambhu needed that break to sit back and relax reading the Tolkien series. Grumbling and miffed, little Shambhu rolled out of his bed reluctantly. This is it. I have to leave home, he declared. He quickly got ready and put on his beige-colored hat. And now this hat I had seen at least 7 summers. Little Shambhu was all of 7 years old. His mom had made this hat for him when he was a baby. It was a huge hat which covered his eyes. It was too big for him then. It was too big for him even now. So he could never see his eyes. So I got this question from a lot of children. Shikari Shambhu wears a hat and we never see his eyes. And it all started when he was a small baby. That's what his mom did, gave him an oversized hat. So here he was wearing all of his hat, and all that you could see was his pudgy nose. And so dressed, he marched out of his house with a long staff and a tin in his hand. Mama Shambhu, who was reading in her relaxing chair in the garden, looked up from her book. "Bye, Mom," he said. "I'm off for a walk," said little Shambhu. "Take care of yourself and don't get lost," she said. "Not all those who wander are lost," shouted back little Shambhu. "Then farewell, my little hobbit," shouted back Mama Shambhu with a smile. Armed with the staff and the can, our gallant wanderer went gallivanting into the woods. But first, he had to do some digging under the old mango tree. Bending down on his knees, little Shambhu looked closely at the rocks and turned them over very carefully. In the damp soil, he found 6 earthworms wriggling away helplessly. "Sorry," said little Shambhu, "I can't help it, but somebody needs to have their food." With a little remorse, he dropped them, all the 6 worms, in the can, and he trotted off to the pond. There he was at the marshiest pond ever. Tiny frogs croaking about, bees and flies buzzing, dragonflies hovering over the little lily pods as if they were just going to land. Little Shambhu spotted his raft, which was an old log, which was parked by the bank of the pond. One solitary frog sat in deep meditation, contemplating on life, thinking about whether he should leave the pond and go out and explore the world. Little Shambhu jumped onto that log and toppled the poor frog splash back into the water. "Looks like I'm never going to leave the pond," said the toad as he sunk back into the marshy world. Little Shambhu now rowed the log with his staff to the middle of the pond. He balanced himself very well on the log. Then he pulled out his can of worms and from his pocket and threw the worms into the water. A school of colorful guppies from grade 2, 3 and 4 came up rushing to grab their grub. Little Shambhu looked down at them, and a galore of colors glittering in the sunlight that found its way to the murky, marshy pond. Suddenly he heard a sound from behind him. Yelp, yelp! It was a tiny animal sound. What unfortunate creature was this, he thought, and he turned to look behind. There he saw the tiniest puppy he had ever seen splashing away in the water. Little Shambhu swung into action, somersaulting over the log using the staff onto a small rock, which was a smooth brown rock, which was close to the puppy. Little Shambhu landed on it, splash, and he slipped over it, and he fell into the water. The brown rock flipped over in the air and landed on his head. Oops! It was an old solar hat, the one that a ranger would wear. Little Shambhu grabbed the puppy and swam back to the banks. Our hero, all muddy and murky, with the puppy in arms, marched back home. Mama Shambhu looked up from her book and she was startled, and she said, "What have you got there, Ranger?" she exclaimed. Papa Shambhu had just stepped out into the garden, breakfast tray in one hand and a song on his lips. Dum dum digga digga. He was in a good mood because he had tossed the perfect omelette back onto the pan. Well, that was an achievement for him. So he was happy. Papa Shambhu was in a jolly good mood, and he managed to flip the omelette so well. So he was open for all sort of questions. "What are we naming him?" he asked cheerfully. Little Shambhu was surprised. First he looked at his mom for approval. Well, she had just given up on them. Then he turned to his dad with a big smile under the huge solar hat that he was wearing, and he said, "Dum Dum." And folks, that's how Little Shambhu met his best friend and also his calling to be a bungling forest ranger. Thank you.
That's a lovely way of telling a story. Give him a one big round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. May we request Roopa ji to come?
So, as I said, I'm one of the co-founders of Bangalore Walks, which tells stories about Bangalore. We are in Bangalore International Center. It is Karnataka's birthday month. So I thought I'd tell you a story about Bangalore. This is what I do. And this actually earns us money also. This part of my job actually earns me money. The writing does not. So since we were talking money. So anyway, this is when my husband and I were designing the walks for Bangalore. There were no history walks happening. We had just come back from the US. It was 2004. And I, like many other Indians who travel abroad, the cheapest tourism experience is a walk. It's also the funnest one. I mean, you get to walk in a city, you see it from up close, you hear the stories, and those are the things that remain in your mind. So we lived in London for a while, we lived in the US for a while, and we were always going on walks. And then when we came back to India and said, there are no walks, but what a city to start it in. Bangalore. Does Bangalore have any history? It doesn't seem like. I mean, whenever somebody visits us in Bangalore, where do we take them? After we show them Vidhan Saudha, Cubbon Park, Lal Bagh, we're like, okay, let's go to a pub. Because there's nothing else to see. Maybe we'll take them to the Bangalore Palace. That's a stretch. But after that, we're like, no, Bangalore is not a place to see things. It's an experience. So let's show you bookstores. Let's show you nice restaurants. Let's show you nice design. But we don't have anything to show you. So that was our impression of our own home city also, that it didn't have much of a history. It also looks very modern. If we go around Bangalore, it doesn't look like a traditional old city at all. It's very with it. Even the kind of people who live here, the kind of industry that it supports, it's always IT, biotech, always the next sunrise industry is happening here. This is the intellectual capital of India, the Silicon Valley of India, all that. So we said, but could there be some history? So my husband was very keen on this, so he went and did a lot of research, and we found amazing history in Bangalore. And this is true of any city you come from, any neighborhood you come from, anywhere in the world. History is in every stone of the pavement. You just have to know where to look for it. So we made this our thing, and we began to look for history. And the very first walking tour of Bangalore, my husband led, maybe in 2004, 2005 perhaps. And that's all we've been doing since then, telling stories of Bangalore. So I want to tell you a story from that very first walk, it was our signature flagship walk. It was called the Victorian Bangalore Walk. We used to walk people down MG Road, a place where everyone has walked for so many years, and charge them 500 rupees each to walk them down that road. That was how audacious it was. And who would pay? a lot of people did. We continue to charge almost the same price 15 years, 18 years later. But this was the opening thing of the very first walk, opening story. So if you will indulge me, I would ask you to please close your eyes so that I can take you back. How many years is that now? 223 plus 9. So 232 years. Let's go back in history. 232 years. This is going to be an interactive story, so even if you have your eyes closed, please keep answering my questions if you know the answer. So there are 2 roads in the vicinity of Bangalore International Center that begin now with old. What are those roads? Old Airport Road and Old Madras Road. Now this story is set in Old Madras Road. I don't need to close my eyes. I don't know why I'm closing my eyes. Yeah, all of you close your eyes. So this story happened 231 years ago. Imagine the times. There is no electricity. Okay, the only way of communication is shouting or sending somebody by horse. The only way of warfare is hand to hand. And down this road, the Old Madras Road, an army comes marching. From where? Madras, obviously. That's why it's called the Old Madras Road. So this army came marching from Madras to Bangalore. Now, who was at the head of this army? To know who was at the head of this army, we need to do a little exercise in your knowledge of history. Let's see how much international history you know. I'm going to throw some dates at you, and I want you to tell me what important world event happened in that year. 1775. No need to put your hands up, just tell me.
Plastic.
No, that was 1757. 1775, ulta. No, before the French Revolution. Similar, not quite after that. Or before that, I'm not sure. But 1775 was the Declaration of Independence in America. The American colonies declared independence, okay? And in 1781, finally they became independent when there was a little battle called the Battle of Yorktown, where an American general defeated a British general. Okay, who was the American general who defeated this British general in 1781 and won independence for the American colonies from the mothership, the Britain? George Washington. Okay, everybody knows that. Everybody always knows the victor's name in history. Okay, next, 1789. French Revolution, that's right. Then 1805. That's a little less known. Battle of Trafalgar. Okay, 1815. Important battle worldwide. A very big... Waterloo, exactly. So 1815 Battle of Waterloo. Now, if I told you that all these important world events had some bearing on this little town called Bengaluru, tucked away in the south of India, and that people who were marching down that Old Madras Road has something to do with all these events, would you believe me? This was 1791, the year that we are talking about. No, of course not. Bangalore was a little hick town, backwater. What would happen here that would connect them to all these important world events? Let me tell you. 1775, the Declaration of Independence. 1781, as I said, the battle was won by George Washington. Who was the English general who lost? Oh, wonderful. Who said that? Okay, so you know your history. Very few people know that it was a Lord Cornwallis who lost. Now this Cornwallis, have you heard of the name? Yes. What did he do? Why do we know his name? Yeah, so he goes back to England, completely in shame. He has lost America to the French because the French and Washington are collaborating, and he has lost America to the French. And he's one of the greatest strategists, but he returns to England in shame. But because he's one of the greatest generals, they say, we'll give you another chance. You need to go to another place where the French will take over if we don't act immediately. And they send him all the way immediately to India. So Cornwallis comes to Madras, which is first he comes to Calcutta, which is the capital of British territories in India. Then he takes a ship, comes to Madras, capital of the southern British territories, and then gets on a horse and comes due west. If you go due west from Madras, where do you come? Bangalore. So he gets on a horse and comes straight to Bangalore. Now, why would one of the greatest generals in the world make it one of his first acts as Governor General of India to come to a hick town called Bengaluru? Why? This was 1791. Nice and cool. Everybody says for the weather. Obviously, who wants to stay in Madras? They would rather come to Bangalore. So that's why Cornwallis also came to Bangalore. No, there was something more important. Yes, so there was a king here. There were two kings here, a father-son duo who had frustrated the mighty British army for years. So Tipu Sultan was ruling at that time in Mysore, and Cornwallis knew that if he had to salvage his tattered reputation, it would be by getting Tipu Sultan defeated. Okay, so he comes here, but Bangalore is on the way to Tipu's capital of... No, Mysore was not his capital, Srirangapatna. So you have to come via Bangalore. So he came in 1791 to set the siege of Bangalore. Okay, the siege of Bangalore fort. Has anyone been to Bangalore fort? Or what's left of it? Where is it? No? Yes, just outside the Victoria Hospital. All that is left of the great Bengaluru fort is one gate, which is called the Delhi Gate. That is, why was it called the Delhi Gate? Every gate that was facing north was called Delhi Gate because the Mughals were the greatest empire at that time. So Delhi Gate. So he comes here. The Bangalore people in the Bangalore fort put up a great resistance, but the siege of Bangalore lasts just 3 weeks. Bangalore falls. Cornwallis waits, collects his forces. In 1792, he marches on Srirangapatna. And you know what happens there? Did you know? Yeah, so what happens, that was the third battle of Mysore, by the way. There were 4 Anglo-Mysore wars. This was the third battle of Mysore. He marches all the way to Srirangapatna, and Tipu is actually defeated, pushes back. And why does Tipu get defeated? Now we come back to our dates, okay? So, what had happened in 1789? The French Revolution. Well before that, in 1784, after Hyder Ali had died, Tipu Sultan had established a correspondence with the French because Hyder Ali himself had done that. Now, Indian armies fought very differently from British ones, and Hyder Ali was a smart strategist who had realized that a very different kind of enemy had entered India now. So we could not fight them with the usual Indian tactics of fighting. So we had to align with somebody else who fought exactly the same way as the British. And who was the other power, European power, jockeying for power in the subcontinent? The French. So enemy's enemy is my friend. So Hyder Ali had made friends with the French. Now, the French, in 1789, what happens? The French Revolution happens. Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, what happens to them? Guillotined. They lose their heads. The French troops have no one to take orders from. And this is when Cornwallis decides to attack Tipu Sultan because whatever contract he had with the French for help doesn't stand anymore. So he says, this is a good time to attack. So he attacks. Tipu loses. He has to give up 2 of his sons as hostages to the British. They are taken away. So that happens. Then, but Tipu is down but not out. He's given his sons away, he is defeated, he has signed a treaty where he's not supposed to correspond with the French anymore. But a few years later, Tipu is writing to the French. Who is the French commander now? Napoleon. So he writes to Napoleon Bonaparte. He says, I need you to come and help me. And Napoleon says, Comrade Tipu, I'm coming to free you from the yoke of the British. And Napoleon thinks of himself as Alexander the Great. He's a world conqueror. He begins to come from France. He has to go via Egypt. And he would have come, except that in Egypt, in a famous battle called the Battle of the Nile, a British general burns the French fleet. What is the British general's name? Nelson, Admiral Nelson. So he burns the French fleet and Tipu does, what's his name? Napoleon does not come to the last journey from Egypt to South India, he did not make. If Napoleon had made that last journey to South India and come and helped Tipu, it's quite possible that the south of India would have become a Franco-Islamic empire and the north would have been under the British, and history would have been very, very different. But, Napoleon did not come, he went back, and finally, he went back. Here, what happened was, Richard Wellesley, the governor who had been in charge after Cornwallis went back, his reputation had been restored, Tipu had been defeated, Tiger of Mysore had been quietened, he went back. Next person to come in is Wellesley. Wellesley is a hawk. He is not like Cornwallis who's going to let him go with the treaty. He said we have to finish Tipu once and for all. He's communicating with Napoleon again. We can't trust this man. So he sends another army to attack Tipu Sultan for breaking the terms of the treaty. He was not supposed to correspond with the French. He has corresponded with the French. Time up, right? So yeah, so just 1.5 minutes. So he comes all the way, Napoleon, he sends his brother Arthur Wellesley to attack Tipu Sultan. This is the 4th Anglo-Mysore War. Tipu is defeated and killed. In 1799, May 4th, the Tiger of Mysore breathes his last. Arthur Wellesley is so chuffed, he's very young, and he's only got this role because he's Richard Wellesley's brother to lead the troops. So he goes off and says, I need to live in Tipu's palace. He lives in Tipu's palace. He begins to enjoy Srirangpatna until the water really begins to interfere with his gut, and he goes back to the US, to England. Goes back, becomes one of the greatest soldiers England has ever known, defeats Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo, because Arthur Wellesley is none other than the Duke of Wellington. So you see how all these events are connected. So the greatest personalities in the world, whether they were George Washington or Lord Cornwallis, whether it was Louis XVI, whether it was Napoleon, whether it was the Duke of Wellington, or indeed Tipu Sultan himself, were all connected with this little town called Bangalore and with that road called Old Madras Road. Thank you.
That's a lovely one. Yes. Ameen, would you like to? Yeah. That's a lovely one. Yeah.
Wow, what a story. A tough act to follow. You know, a lot of my work these days is not with children's stories, but with personal narrative and stories to grown-ups. Also in the leadership context, but also a lot of stories which are helping people just connect with each other. Personal stories from our own lives. This particular story that I'm sharing, I usually don't share with people. It's 25 years that we are celebrating of Kathalaya. I remember during a story sharing circle at Kathalaya, sharing a similar story. So I'll share a story from my life. I was raised by a single parent, by my mother. So when you go from a double income home to a single income home, income halves, right? No, it doesn't halve. It goes to 1/3. Because those days women used to make lower than, or much lesser than men. And my mother was a lecturer, and lecturers aren't too well paid. So our family income went to 1/3 of what it was overnight. And one of my, so I still remember, you know, the only vehicles we had at home were the vehicles we were born with, our legs. And I used to walk 6 or 7 miles to school, 6 or 7 miles back. And we never felt or thought that we were doing anything extraordinary, because millions of people still do that in India. We used to come back and play football. And after that, if my mom said, dal khatam ho gaya, run to the grocers and get dal, we would run to the grocers and get dal. My biggest dream those days was to have a bicycle. Not a Hero, not a Hercules, not an Atlas, but a BSA SLR. But we couldn't afford a BSA SLR. And my mother was raising a large family, me and my 2 elder brothers, on a professor's salary. So when we, you know, the first cycle that came to our house was a second-hand cycle. A neighbor had upgraded to a moped or a scooter, and that cycle came to our house. And I still remember my mom telling the neighbor, no, we are fine, we don't need this. And he said, or they said, you pay for it. So we paid for it and we got the cycle home, but I have 2 elder brothers. So I could never smell that cycle. My eldest brother, he finished his MBA and he joined Amul, which was in the neighborhood, as an assistant brand manager. He was the only officer in the officer's cadre who used to cycle to work. And with his first salary, he got a Luna. And then the cycle came to me. But I was already in college by then. I was trying to impress a girl in my class. And I thought, if I take this cycle, she's certainly not going to be impressed. So something that I waited for such a long time, I never used. Then I moved to Ahmedabad. My job in advertising took me to Bombay. In Bombay, you know, we all travel like this. Yeah. Then I moved to Delhi. And in Delhi, I used to have a motorcycle. Around those days, my mom retired. And she came to stay with me for a couple of months. My elder brother was already in the US. He was doing well for himself. I was doing well. I was in a multinational company. But when I look back, I saw that, my mother, she had sacrificed everything for us. She had just 2 silk saris in her wardrobe when she retired. And silk is expensive. It was only cottons that she had. In Hindi, there's a phrase, ki kaam karte karte chappal kis gaye. That was the story of life. So I remember when she came to stay with me, I used to have this motorcycle. One day while coming back from office, I sold the bike. There are these shops where you can sell the bike, spot sale, and I got 30,000 bucks. I had some money in the bank. I took 10,000, added it to the 30,000, and for 40,000 rupees, not down payment, but total payment, 40,000 rupees, I bought my first car. It was a old Maruti 800, 1984 model. It had run 1 lakh kilometers. It was not second hand, it was third hand, but it was a car. And I remember driving it home. I thought I'll surprise my mom. I ran up the flight of stairs of our rented house in Lajpat Nagar, and I told her, drop everything, come rushing down. Come rushing down. I thought, surprise, big surprise will happen. I normally get excited about small things, so she ignored me completely, continued doing her work. And this time there was, in an agitated voice, I told her, it's urgent, drop everything, come down. And we had some relatives in Delhi, so she assumed that something untoward has happened. So thinking there is some gadbad, she dropped everything she was doing without putting on a dupatta, without wearing her sandal properly or without carrying her bag. She rushed. And she sat in the car, assuming I have borrowed someone's car. And she said, chalo, chalo, where are we going? And I started driving, and this is not what I had imagined the first drive to be. And she's sitting there all tensed, assuming I have borrowed someone's car. And I start thinking, hey, this is not how it was supposed to be. How do I... The more she sees me silent, the more she gets worried, and she says, "Tu kuch bolta kyun nahi? Kya ho gaya? Kahan ja rahe hum?" And I suddenly break out of my thinking. I say, nothing happened. I sold the bike. And she almost jumped out and said, what? You sold the bike? How will you go to office? How will we go shopping? And I said, don't worry, I bought the car. What? And this time she was really surprised. And she's, what? Are you out of your mind? What do you know about cars? And then she said, beta, car, house, these are big decisions. We are middle class people. Buying a car, buying a house. You didn't even talk to me. What is the subtext there? कि मैं जिंदा हूँ, मुझसे बात तो कर सकता था. You didn't even talk to me. And I remember saying, Mom, this car's for you. You're retired now. It takes an effort for you to jump and sit on that motorcycle like that. It's not easy for you. Your son can do that for you. You don't have to travel like that. And I remember, very clearly, she went silent. And maybe her life flashed back in front of her eyes. And when I saw her, she had tears in her eyes. And she was trying to hold them back. But she's also been my father for me. And while playing the father role, she had never cried in front of us. So she was trying to hold back her tears. And I'm sure you know this. When you have tears in your eyes, if you start talking, they'll roll down your cheeks. So she suddenly went very silent. Noticing that I had tears in my eyes. But if I said something now, my tears would roll down my cheeks. So I went silent. And that day, our first drive, nobody said anything. We drove around large parts of Delhi in absolute silence. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But sometimes you can have the best conversations without words. I had one of my most beautiful conversations with her. She understood me. I understood her. We didn't have to say anything. Sometimes the best stories don't have words. Thank you.
Give him a big hand. One more. Very good. Okay. Yes, madam, please come. Yeah.
5 minutes.
Yeah, we have, whatever she approves is the time. Okay. Yeah. She's so kind. Yeah.
Okay. When you're happy and you know, you clap your hands. When you're happy and you know, you clap your hands. When you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. When you're happy and you know, you clap your hands. When you're happy and you know, you snap your fingers. When you're happy and you know, you snap your fingers. When you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. When you're happy and you know, you snap your fingers. When you're happy and you know, you slap your thighs. When you're happy and you know, you slap your thighs. When you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. When you're happy and you know, you slap your thighs. When you're happy and you know, you say hello. Hello. When you're happy and you know, you say hello. Hello. When you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. When you're happy and you know, you say hello. Hello. When you're happy and you know, you do all four. Hello. When you're happy and you know, you do all four. Hello. When you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it. When you're happy and you know, you do all four. Hello. Hello. So here I am wondering what story to tell you, because I heard such beautiful stories from the others and I know it's getting late. So I can tell you a very transformative kind of a story, or I could tell you a story from my childhood, or the story of the bird that came to visit the mountain. So which one would you like? What mood are you in? Childhood? All right. Okay. Since you all wanted a childhood story, I will share a childhood story. So as I was telling you, in my childhood, I went to a school called the Little Angels High School. We were not angels at all, but that was the school's name, and our fees was 1 rupee a month. And I think I had to pay a term fees of 10 rupees. And once I remember, my mother said, you pay this fee and get me the, the card they would fill out and put the. So I used to travel by what is called the BEST bus. And I was a very nice child. I mean, obedient and, scared of my mother a bit. So I was carrying this bag and somebody had slit. This was in 1960s, remember. And somebody had slit that and taken the 10 rupees. That was the term fees. So I went to school and I didn't pay the fee. And I came back and my mother asked me, you paid the fees, no? I said, yeah. Because I didn't know how to tell her that I didn't pay the fee, or rather that somebody had slit the bag. And then she said, she knew, even now people can make out when I'm lying. So she looked at my eyes and said, Nejama solla. Tell me the truth. Did you pay the fee? And then, of course, those days, no human rights, child rights and all. Only one right. Finish. Okay, so then I told her, well, I didn't do anything. Somebody stole, see the bag. Why didn't you tell me this before? So, okay, so this was part of my school experience. And in the school, in my 4th standard, I still remember, we were at the end of a corridor, and that corridor had a huge bell, and that was the bell for the entire building. So every time it went dung, it would like almost deafening in the ears. Okay, so I was short as I am now, but I was thin, and I had to sit in the front bench. And the benches, somehow there were no designers in those days. So, the class had very small benches. And just 2 people, normal average size could sit. So I was short, I had to sit in the front, and it was a co-education school, 1 boy, 1 girl, 1 boy, 1 girl. So here right in front next to me was Raju Wagle, and he was generously built. Thighs, And so when he sat, every time he sat, he occupied the whole bench. And I kind of always fell down because I had to sit next to him because he was also short. Another thing that he had was his teeth. They would never go in. So people, all the children used to tease, we can grate coconuts on his teeth. Let's do some carrots also. But he was quite a sport. He didn't bother about all that. He would come and sit down. Now my mother, she was very good with math from Tanjore. So she'll always say those who drink Kaveri water are always good in maths. And I was just the opposite. Everything went above my head. I used to go home with answers. She used to ask me to write answers and come. And I used to say 3.5 cows, 4 3/4 men. And she'll give one dung, maramanda. You know? How can there be 4 3/4 men? Now maybe there are, but I'm just... But anyway, so she said, you better pay attention today because you're having a very important arithmetic class. So I said, okay. And I told Raju, listen, you better behave yourself, because all the teachers had an eye on us, because every time it was an adjustment of space. Because every time he would be pushing, I would be falling, I would be pushing, and all this would, you two in the front is what we were called. Okay, so I said, let's do a little rehearsal because I want to pay attention to this math class. Okay, so he said, okay, yeah. So then he sat, and I also sat next to him and said, perfect, now don't move at all. Okay. One great thing about that school was we were on the 3rd floor, and it had a long corridor, like never-ending one like that, because we were young at that time. It looked like that. And at the end of the corridor, ours was the first school that had a water cooler. So one of the reasons for going to school also was to drink that water. Okay, so we had to press, and then, wow, that cold water was such a delight. So there would be a queue, and we used to finish our dabbas early. You know, in Bombay, there's no space for playing, so we used to turn and eat and then come and, drink the water. So now this was one period before the lunch, and both of us were sitting, and attention, and the teacher enters. And you know, the teacher had a stage just like how I'm standing now. She was always a performer, and she had to be respected in those days. And she had a long scale, a double scale that you call, and it would be put on the table over there. And before she got into the class, we had to be there. So we all had to stand up and say, good morning, miss. Sit down, sit down. Thank you, miss. This was the routine. Okay. So then she took the chalk piece and she wrote on the board, fractions. And I'm completely attentive, okay, because I'm 100% sure I'm going to pay attention. And then she says, if you take an apple and cut it into half, you get 1 by 2, 1 by 2. Now just imagine a little girl sitting like where Roopa is sitting, and looking at this big monster, this thing on the stage, who looks like a 70 mm, and she's showing me an apple like this. And I said, oh my God, such a big apple. And I went into Apple Land. Totally lost. I think there was the sign, in my DNA, the storytelling was there. So I already went into the Apple Land. So that was the time our friend, Raju, decided that he needs to adjust himself. And he just moved like that. And down, I fell down. Went down, off went my apple land, and I fell with a thud. And what do you think? I am a human being, right? And looked at him and was livid. And I was so angry. And in those days, we had these short sleeves, and all of us were given this polio drops. And it would be 2 toink rounds. It won't go at all. Even still now I have it. Okay. So this was given to every child. So this boy also had that. And as I told you, big, fat. Yeah. So I looked at his hand and toink, pinched him with all my might. I pinched him because I was so angry. And ow! He did that. The apple, the fractions, the teacher just turned around. She looked at Raju, stand up. Stand up. And she took that huge, big scale and she came down. And Raju knew what was going to come. She took the scale and pat one. Second. But she only. You're talking also. One more, louder than the previous one. But she only. Again you're talking. And then poor thing, he got solid beatings and I was just watching and she said, out of my sight. Out of the classroom, I don't want to see your face. And poor thing, Raju went out of the class. Mixed emotions in me, but at the same time, first time, I know how the bench feels. Oh my God, I didn't know this all these years, okay? And it was so comfortable. But inside my heart, I was feeling bad that Raju was punished because of me. And of course the teacher, she's done her job. She turned around, she said, homework. If your father cut the apple, you get 1 by 4, 1 by 4. What 1 by 4, what 1 by 2, it all went above. And she gave homework. Then, done, and she left. And we always shared the lunch. That is myself, Raju, and 2 more girls, Latika and Sheila. We used to turn around and my mother had sent 1 laddu. Of course, there was a lot of ration. We were also a large family. My mother used to make limited laddus. So 1 laddu was sent after a festival with all that badam, pista, everything. I went out because I had to call Raju. So I went out and I said, hey Raju, come here, let's have lunch. Katti. Because of you only. So I said, I'm sorry, Raju. Katti. And I said, come and have lunch. No. My mother sent laddu. It's only for you. Full laddu you can have. Laddu, He came. He sat down. I gave him the whole laddu. And I ate my lunch. Finished the dabba and water. So, closed the dabba, came out, and at the end of the corridor, the water! What excitement just to have water. So, went there and bluck, 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 having the water, the person who's going to ring the bell. Next is my class teacher's period. So, he was coming to ring the bell. I said, oh my God, I have to get into the class before my teacher comes. And marathon running. From that end of the corridor, dying, not even seeing where I'm running. And I was always good at sports, but this running was a little faster too. And I think Raju saw that he's going to ring the bell and he wanted to come and drink the water. So he comes out from the class and he starts running, dying, full in the opposite direction. So I'm running like this and he's running like that. And you can imagine 2 people, 2 marathon Olympic runners coming together and one big mass knocked into me and I saw stars and something was flowing down. We had a white uniform and a pinafore like a blue color and a white. And I think that was blood, but I just passed out. And I only faintly remember, Hatto, 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 the person who was going to ring the bell. He came, he rang the bell of course, but he told the children to run away and he carried me 3 floors down. And next I knew there was this big injection, those days no disposable, the big glass injection with a big needle, and that needle went straight into my, and they said, you know, she has to be taken to the hospital. And the next thing I knew that the principal, Madam Shetty, her husband, my mother, we were all there in the Sion Hospital, which was next door, and the doctor there pulling out a needle and thread and saying, Beti, I'm going to give you some stitches. You won't cry, no, Beti. Why won't I cry? He's already telling me to cry, isn't it? Because he's going to stitch and he's showing me the needle. So the minute, even before he came, I was crying, but of course he put about 10 stitches, and then no disposable bandage, so cotton, and the bandage was put, and my mother was requested to change the dressing every day. And then he said, since you were such a lovely Beti, here is a lovely gift for you, a gift with a wrapping paper. I still remember the paper in which it was wrapped. It was beautiful. And she said, you give it to your mother, you don't have to see it now. I gave it to my mother, went home, pampered at home. And every day, just when she used to remove that, it used to be very painful. And after a week, ting tong, my class teacher came to see me at home. And she came, and behind her was Raju. So she went to talk to my mother, and Raju came to where I was sitting. He came there and he said, hey, how are you? Yeah, how are you? I looked at him. Raju, what happened to your... I don't know, yeah, how I lost it. Oh. And then my mother comes from inside. And she said, see, these are the 2 books that you got, the cutting books. And there's a dabba there. She said, open the dabba. So I opened the dabba. Guess what was there? 2. My teeth, my teeth, my teeth, my teeth. That's what Raju said. And then I looked at him. Quick fix was not available. And so that year, my father got a transfer. I had to leave that lovely little angel school. And I felt so terrible to leave because I loved my teachers, I loved the place. And as a remembrance, I gave 1 tooth to Raju. And I kept 1 tooth for myself. And then 20 years later is when I returned to Bombay. I went back to that school. I met some old friends. And one of them, Sheila, we always had a competition. She said, do you remember Raju? I said, of course. How can I forget him? He's now he's a big architect now, you know. Oh, and he has 2 children, a boy and a girl. And the boy, he looks exactly like Raju. And that was the last that I heard from him. A small jhalak of my lovely childhood story. Thank you.
That's a wonderful one. That's a lovely one. Can I request all the speakers, panelists to come onto the stage, please? Yeah, we'll have one formal
thank you.
word of thanks to them.
Yeah.
Any 1 or 2 questions you can definitely ask, because I told you that I promised you I'll give you a chance to ask. Anybody want to ask any one question?
One.
Okay, that's good, but I will ask one question. Let's see if nobody is asking. Can you tell us what is the deepest satisfaction that will give you going forward?
If I can continue to tell stories.
Hey, that's lovely. Give her a big hand. Wonderful. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I think what I received just now from all of you, the emotional connect and the happiness, and many people say they feel transformed after coming to my course. So I feel if I can continue that, that would be the greatest thing for me.
Hey, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, Savio?
Yeah, I guess it's the same for a storyteller and for an artist. Sharing what we do, inspiring people, and I guess that is something which I'm going to take that forever. Children coming up and telling me that they have become artists just because they have seen my work in Twinkle, and that is something which is worth anything in the world. So yeah.
What would give me joy is, through the work that I do, increasingly I believe that the best storytellers first need to be good listeners. And it's only the listeners who make better. And that's the difference between orators and storytellers. Orators speak, but storytellers listen. Writers listen. And that's why they can make better stories. Now, so I'll share an incident about listening, which is like a good, satisfaction or return gift. There's a organization in BRAC, it's the largest NGO in the world, and they do a lot of work. They set up relief camps for people who've been displaced by floods or Rohingyas crossing the border. And so a senior lady was going and meeting people, and she goes into a tent and she sees a 9-year-old girl sitting alone there. And she asked the girl, "Beta, what would you like to be when you grow up?" That's what a lot of writers also do as part of their research, right? In a place where school has been lost, home, country, everything has been lost, she's checking if hope is still alive. So she asked the child, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" And the child pointed to a TV. Maybe this family saved a TV from wherever they were coming, and there was TV in the tent. So she pointed to the TV and she said, "When I grow up, I'd love to be a television." And a lot of us, when we hear somebody say like that something, and we go like, "What do you mean, television?" And the child will shut up because the child knows that she's being judged. So the lady, she didn't judge the child for her response. She just appreciated that response, and she followed up with a second question. She said, "Why would you like to be a television?" And the girl said, "When the television speaks, everyone listens to the television." Could you listen to the unspoken? The unspoken is that the child wants to be heard. The best storytellers not just listen to the spoken, but also to the unspoken. So if you can listen more, that will be the best satisfaction.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We are one member who
Sure. My name is Aditi. It's not as much of a question as it is just to hear your thoughts on how, you carry a huge burden when you tell stories of passing down history. Stories have always been an oral tradition to pass on wisdom. But when you're also dealing with heavy subjects, like in one case you're talking to children, and in one case you're passing down actual history, how do you deal with censorship in terms of, there is the Chinese whisper of stories that every time the Ramayana has been told to us, it is modified in little bits and pieces, and spice is added, and mirch and masala, and by the time it comes down to us, you're hearing a very different version of it. So how do you feel your contribution to that? Are you very aware that that is what you're doing, that you're passing on something and might be changing history through that process? Or is it more, even if that is happening, it's okay because I'm still doing my duty as a storyteller and passing down some part of that history? I really hope that my point is coming across.
No. It says the authenticity of this story still remains when it goes from generation to generation. That's one way of putting it.
No, every story changes as it passes through every storyteller, and it also changes as it is received. Anyone who receives the story also makes their own changes. We always listen to that confirmation bias kind of narrative. Whatever the storyteller may be saying, you take it very differently. So as long as we are aware of that, as long as we understand that no story is ours alone, the story is more of the reader. As a writer, I know that the story belongs to the reader more than it does to me. It may have come through me, and it has come through me based on my own experiences, my own baggage, my own biases, all that become part of the story. One tries to do the best research, to try to be as secular as possible, to try to not be opinionated, not to leave our biases out and all the rest of it. But some stuff we cannot even, we can't even figure out that where it's coming from. It comes from too deep inside. But I think as long as you feel that your job is to convey what is true to you, you want to convey it forward and not take somebody else's word or bias into your storytelling. I think that's the best we can do as storytellers.
You can conclude this by saying the last word.
No, I didn't get, you're saying, do we distort facts when we are telling the history?
Not wantingly, I think, but yeah.
But it gets distorted, you're saying.
Yeah.
No, how do you handle that responsibility that you
Yeah,
could possibly distort?
Yeah. So, history itself is not
Yeah.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
It's
Always somebody's point.
archaeologists, somebody else has written. For instance, now in our country, a lot of history books are being changed. There's a lot of course, saffronization or whatever. There is a coloring happening. A lot of things are happening, and everyone tries to say this is history and this is not history, causing a lot of biases in people's minds. So I'm also very confused, because when I was a history teacher, the history was very different. The textbooks were very different. And so we don't know what is the absolute truth. The problem with stories also is actually they don't have any authentic beginning and end. They're only myths. That's why we call them mythology or legends, They are only heard and passed down. So absolute truth is very difficult. We cannot actually, so as Roopa was saying, what you think is best for yourself. For instance, if I have to tell a story which is going to cause any kind of bias, I drop it. I don't tell that story at all, because I'd rather not tell it when I'm not authentic about the facts. So, but research, I think we need to do in our country, especially a lot of research before we actually go down to tell stories. So we can't help it that we are part of this journey, and we have to go with the chaos. And there will be people who will say you're right, and there'll be other people who will say you're wrong, and you're taking sides. So there's a lot of things that is going on, and there's a churning happening at the moment. So I wouldn't be authentic about anything but I would be truthful to say that, see, this is not authentic, what I'm going to tell you. This is only by hearsay. That is what has passed down. So we are just trying to say this, that this person destroyed this fort, or, all that happens, right? So it's a lot of confusion,
I just want to add that as a children's writer, my attempt is always to give hope, and to teach and enable children and encourage them to always think for themselves, to question received wisdom. So I always encourage questioning.
Wonderful.
That's all.
Wonderful. Yeah. We have one last question. She has been raising her hand. I didn't see her. Okay, go ahead.
Mine is very simple. Wanted to know if you conduct sessions or workshops for children in storytelling or
Oh yes, for all age groups, all programs are there. Anybody can come to storytelling.
Workshops,
whether you are 6 or 60.
I remember when I started, I used to have 48 workshops in a year. I travel a lot. I started only with workshops, and then the courses began. So we have something called the beginner's course, and I've also developed something called the diploma course in storytelling, and now recently the train the trainers course too. So the 3 levels of training, because I want it to be more authentic. I want people to take it seriously and not frivolously. Even now there are people who come to say, oh, storytelling, okay, will you do it with puppets or with pictures? So, they still think that storytelling is just, entertaining, and most of them do it free of charge, so there's no money in it. And that's one of the reasons I began these courses, because I wanted to say that, storytelling is also equally important, just like an engineering degree or a teacher's. So a lot of teachers today, I know from school say, have you got a Kathalaya certificate? I'm so glad about that. Yeah, I mean, say if they have a Kathalaya certificate, then they get admission for teaching very soon in the institution, is what I heard. So I'm glad that you asked this, and I think it's a delight for me. As he said,
Wonderful.
I've finished 187 batches, and you can join our course anytime. The next one is in January.
Yeah, my only request is get certified, get Kathalaya certified. That's it. Okay, wonderful. First of all, I'd like to thank one of our panelists. My first conversation during this panel discussion was with Ameen Haque. So we request you to receive a token of appreciation from our side. Okay. Ameen has been a fantastic storyteller, and he sent me lots of videos. I've only seen 50% of it, but it's very, very impressive videos, is what I say. Okay, thank you so much, Ameen. It's a really inspiration.
Thank you so much, Ameen. I think it was a pleasure. What a heartfelt relationship.
Very good. Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And second one is I talked to Savio and I said, what a lovely journey he had here. Okay, from where he started his journey to what he is today, and what he is inspiring so many children to read and understand the comic through comics. Savio, thank you so much, Savio. Thank you so much, Savio. Yeah. And I first saw, who is this? Roopa Pai. And then I wanted to connect her. She could not connect her on the WhatsApp and all that. But till that period, I saw that she has written this book, Bhagavad Gita for children. And I immediately clicked onto it and bought it. I've read only few pages. I will complete that reading as well. But Roopa, it's wonderful to have you here. Okay, very good. Okay.
But we cannot leave you out, Krishna.
One more panelist is definitely for Geeta. All of you, please give her a big hand.
Thank you.
But I must mention, this program has to happen. There is one person who is responsible, and that she and her team.
Yes,
Sandhya
Deva.
Please,
and also
please
Deva.
do come.
Come.
Come on to the stage. You have done a wonderful work here. We want to
come, Sandhya.
Appreciation.
Thank you, Sandhya. Thank you so much.
Come here first. You come here, and it's wonderful to.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We've been bombarding her for posters and correspondence, and she's been very patient. Thanks to BIC, because they gave us the space.
Thank you so much for BIC. Thank you so much for Sandhya and the team as well. And
I would also like to thank Deva. Her name is Deva Nayaki. She's been with me for more than 12 years now, and I would say she is the pillar of Kathalaya, and without her nothing moves.
I must thank all of you, wonderful audience.
And I want to thank Raja for photography.
And the cameraman, my good cameraman.
Your name, sir?
That's there. And all of you wonderful audience, we must thank them because they stood there. Yes.
Thank you for a wonderful evening. I feel like a little child again.
How sweet. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is for Krishna ni be.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Always been there when we asked him to come, and a great friend who's traveled with us through the years. Thank you, Krishna.
So that is a wonderful book for sale as well. You can definitely buy. But I want to go in this with one story. But first of all, tell me, how was the session overall? Yay, lovely. This is my favorite story. Every time when I conduct any program like this, I tell. And I would have told 1,000 times, but I still tell this story. There was one guru. Guru had two naughty students. These two naughty students had only one goal in their mind: how to fool one day Guru. Anytime you ask, what are you doing? They were saying, we are planning how to fool one day Guru. And then one day what happened is, let me see, one second. Hello? Yeah, now I'll use this. This is going to be good. Now what happened was that one day these two children got one wonderful idea. They said, we'll hold a bird in our hand and go to Guru and ask whether it is alive or dead. If he says it is alive, we'll press it and kill it. And if he says it is dead, we'll open our hands, it will fly. Anyway, we will fool the Guru. And they ran to Guru. Guru. We have one simple question. We have a bird in our hand. Well, tell me whether it is alive or dead. Guru is always smarter than? Absolutely. Guru said only one sentence. It's all in? Why I tell this story is, you learned many things in the last 2.5 hours. Whether you'd like to go back and implement or not, it's all in? No, it's in your hand.